This is The Meaningful Way. I'm your host, Luke Iorio. Last time I checked, there's absolutely no class in school that teaches us about, well, us. Meaning, how is it that we work? What are we as human beings? How do our brains impact what we experience and see? Where does stress really come from? And what are we supposed to do with it? And how do we get good at this thing called change instead of constantly suffering from it? Well, today, I wanted to see how far we can get into these topics and get into this missing class that we haven't had yet, because it's truly amazing to me as this information, this knowledge comes together, it really can create some profound personal wisdom for living a more meaningful life. And to do that, we are very honored to be able to have our guest, Dr. Bill Crawford, join us today. In addition to being named TEC Candidate Speaker of the Year for 2016, Dr. Bill Crawford holds a Masters Degree and Ph.D. in Psychology from the University of Houston. He is also a licensed psychologist, author of 7 books, and an organizational consultant. Over the last 30 years, he's created more than 3,500 presentations for such organizations as Sprint, Shell, the American Medical Association, PBS, and many other organizations and professional associations, both nationally and internationally. In addition, his 2 PBS specials have been seen by more than 15 million people, and he's been quoted as an expert in such diverse publications as the New York Times, Entrepreneur, the Chicago Tribune, Investors Business Daily, and Working Mother, just to name a few of those. And today we're also going to get a bit into his book, Life from the Top of the Mind, which is truly not only just the book that he's published and authored, among many, but it's part of his system, it's part of a podcast, it's part of all of the great work that Dr. Crawford is doing. And with that, Bill, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on The Meaningful Way.
My pleasure, Luke. I love the title of your podcast, The Meaningful Way.
Thank you. I have to say, there's one thing that I did see and learn a little bit about in your background that I didn't have in your bio, but I had to ask you about. And it's that you've been referred to as the Steve Martin of psychologists. How exactly does one get that distinguished honor?
Well, here's the thing. 1, I've got gray hair, so I think me and Steve Martin do that. But 2, I just think we learn best when we're having a good time. Mm-hmm. And so I always have a good time, and I am a big Steve Martin fan. So there's some things that I do that people go, oh, that reminds me of Steve Martin. I think I bring humor into what I do. So I think it all rolls together in that and makes that what the deal.
Well, that's fun. I think let's see what a couple of crazy guys can get up to in this conversation then. One of the places that I'd love to get into is, before we get into just some of the incredible expertise that you bring to us today, I'd love to hear a little bit of the backstory, meaning, what was it that really kind of kicked off this incredible interest and incredible curiosity that you have for the mind and the way in which we work, and obviously how much that can, and understanding that, how much that can really impact us showing up as our best selves. Where did that journey begin for you?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I was a drummer. I was a professional drummer from 15 to about 35, and made my living, quote unquote. You don't really make a lot of money in doing that, but had a great time. In my early 30s, I got really clear that music wasn't an industry I could grow old very gracefully in. And I started looking around for, okay, what can I do that I love as much as music? What can I make more money at? And, I think the fact that I grew up in a home where my dad was a recovering alcoholic, he was really big into AA in the East Texas area around Kilgore, Tyler, Longview. Matter of fact, if you looked up Alcoholics Anonymous in the Kilgore, Texas phone book, you found our home phone number. So that's how much my dad was really into it. So I grew up in AA, going to meetings and having people come over and turn their life around and around the kitchen table. Yeah. So I'm thinking that all came together in my early 30s, a desire to do something, desire to help people, desire to help people change their lives, kind of like I had seen my dad do that with AA.
So a couple things. One is because I saw it in some of the stories that you include in your book of how getting exposed to some of the both recovery as well as growth principles that are within AA are things that really stood out to you. And I was wondering if you could just kind of recall what was maybe 1 or 2 that you think you really were drawn to that then impacted this journey.
Yeah, of course, when you're growing up, you just think this is how the world is. You think everybody goes to 3 to 5 AA meetings a week, right? So I didn't really kind of get it until I started working as a professional drummer. And as a professional drummer, music isn't the industry that always has the most mature, maybe, psychologically sound folks in the world, because musicians spend their life getting good at their instrument. Yeah. And so I noticed when I got into it and was getting into bands and running bands and booking and agents and club owners, it was kind of a very interesting psychological experiment in keeping your cool and staying focused and not letting the ambiguity, where's the next gig coming from, and who's leaving the band, not letting that get to you. So I think I kind of saw the need for that there, and then I started reading books like Your Erroneous Zones from Wayne Dyer a long time ago, and a lot of Richard Bach, and a lot of just people who are writing about purposefulness and getting really interested in that. So when I went back to school, I think I was primed to jump into that.
Very cool. Let's actually get a little further into it, because I think one of the things that's really interesting and seems to come up on this show, both from our guests as well as so many people that I know that listen, is how many people arrive at that point, call it mid-30s, which was that pivot point for you in drumming. Some it's maybe mid-40s, as it were. And we almost begin to have that existential crisis. It's these voices start popping up in our minds. These questions start popping up in our minds. And I'm curious, either for you personally or just in terms of even some of the client work that you've done, what's kind of that first sense? What are some of those questions that start to pop up in our minds that we should start to pay more attention to that help us maybe connect to this maybe bigger purpose that we actually have?
Sure, and I think, again, the title of your podcast is so telling. I think it's really, what kind of meaning do I have in life? What is meaningful in my life? Am I just going through the motions? That's what I found myself doing in my early years in music. I had, I'd done it for 15 years. When you do something for that long, the newness of it is over, and now you find yourself kind of going through the motions, and it wasn't like it was no fun. It was fun, but it wasn't meaningful. So I started looking around for what is meaningful. And again, getting into some of the work of Wayne Dyer and Richard Bach, some of those other early pioneers in what was called pop psychology back then. Just the idea that you can have more influence in life. And I started thinking, what would it be like if I could find meaning in my own life and then help other people find it in theirs? I mean, boy, getting paid to that. I call that getting paid to do what I would pay to do, It's like it's that meaning that gave it that weight and had me really just totally switch gears.
Yeah. So at the outset of your book, one of the things that you go into, and specifically I'm talking about your book, Life from the Top of Your Mind, because I know you have quite a few books we could be choosing from here, but you talk about the cycle of stress. And this just seems to be something that is so important with how fast-paced things are right now, how often we find ourselves on the proverbial hamster wheel and caught up, and it only leads to burnout and unfulfillment and all these other things. And I was hoping you could go a little bit into that cycle of stress, as well as then how it's actually more natural than most people might realize.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's something I really do. Every time I do a presentation, I always start off by getting the real-life experiences of my audience. I say, what are the situations that have triggered your stress in the past? And they say things like, oh, man, job or spouses or ex-spouses or kids or traffic or no money or no time or feeling overwhelmed. They just come up with a very good list of all those stressors, those triggers. And I say, okay. So when you find yourself dealing with those, man, how do you find yourself reacting? And everybody says, well, of course we get stressed, but we get frustrated, we get annoyed, we get angry, we get resentful, we feel overwhelmed, we get depressed or worried or anxious. And I say, okay, so have you noticed that there's a chronological relationship here? The triggers are what happens first. It triggers this reaction, but then did you notice it actually makes the original trigger seem worse? Traffic seems worse. Difficult people seem more problematic. The no time is more problematic, which triggers another reaction, which makes it seem worse, and reaction and worse, until we find ourselves trapped in this cycle. Yeah. And everybody goes, yes, Yes. What? I say, okay, I want to show you the science behind what's going on here and how you can break this cycle so that you're not trapped in it. That's where I start.
Tell us a little bit about that science, because there actually is something quite natural that's going on, but we need to be aware of it if we're going to start to change it and use it in our favor.
Exactly. Because of how it works, most people think traffic stresses me out, or difficult people stress me out, kids stress me out at my work or whatever, because one seems to happen right before the other. But the problem is when we define life as this stresses me out, well, we have to change this, whatever it is, work, our spouse, our kids, whatever, before we can feel any differently. And that's what traps us in that cycle. What I've learned is the trigger actually is interpreted by a certain part of the brain. What I go into in my book is basically I break the brain down into three parts. Of course, the brain is very complex, but we can break it down into three parts because they do very different things. That lower brain that goes down your neck, that's the brainstem. Everybody's heard of this. This is where our fight or flight responses are located. The middle brain, the part between your ears, is called the limbic system. And what most people don't know is this part of the brain acts as a gatekeeper. For today's terminology, it acts as a scanner, a processor, and a router. So it scans incoming data, whatever we're thinking, feeling, or experiencing, or seeing, or smelling, whatever, and it interprets it. And if the limbic system sees anything or anyone it doesn't like, anything or anyone that it determines is a problem or a trigger or a stressor or a threat of any kind, it actually sends the data immediately down to the brainstem, bypassing the upper 80% of the brain, the neocortex, what I call the top of the mind. This is where we have access to our interpersonal skills and problem-solving skills, clarity, confidence, creativity, etc. So it throws us down into this brainstem thinking that we are in danger. It's kind of reacting to a spouse like it would a saber-toothed tiger, throwing us into that reactive brain. And of course, if we're in a fight or flight situation, that's perfect. But hardly any, if any, of the situations we encounter on a daily basis are truly fight or flight. But we're thrown into this reactive brain where all we can do is fight or flight. Now, anger is fight, depression is flight, resentment is fight, withdrawal is flight. So it doesn't really necessarily mean just fight or run away. It has to do with the kind of emotions and reactions that are triggered that are generally fight or flight in nature. When we try to deal with life from this lower brain, we can't. It's not equipped to deal with the kind of personal and interpersonal situations we're dealing with. It makes the situation seem worse. We seem more powerless. The limbic system interprets that as more negative data, throws it right back down in the brainstem. So when I'm doing my seminars, I show people how this cycle that we created on the flip chart is now replicated in the brain.
It's incredible because it creates such a almost self-fulfilling, prophecy or travesty in the sense where as we're interpreting all of these triggers, we're kicking off the responses that are based off the interpretation of the threat that this in some way posed, which of course creates the next reaction, the chain reaction that keeps us within this spiral. So how do we break that? What's the pattern? If that's how ingrained we are from just getting so used to the fight and flight and getting kicked down into what is effectively that lower brain, how do we begin to manage ourselves so that we can break the cycle and we can get into, as you say, the top of our mind? Yeah.
What we've got to do is first recognize that our anger, our frustration, our resentment, our depression, our annoyance, all of it is very understandable. We have a right to feel that. But most people tell me, Bill, I don't like feeling stressed and angry and frustrated and annoyed. So we have to recognize that it is not the situation that is making us feel that way, because if that were the case, we'd be giving way more power to difficult people and difficult situations than we want them to have in our life. If we're willing to say, wait a minute, it's this scanner, processor, router part of my brain, it's interpreting the situation in a way that's throwing me into this lower brain, then what I want to do is reprogram or retrain this scanner, processor, router part of the brain in order to send data up to the neocortex versus down to the brainstem. When I can do that, I'm actually triggering a whole different chemical reaction. The lower chemical reaction is adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. Those are the stress chemicals and anger chemicals and frustration chemicals. The top of the mind, or the neocortex chemicals, are serotonin and endorphins. So when we can get this limbic system to actually interpret life, and especially the old triggers, the old difficult parts of life, in a way that send it up to the neocortex versus down to the brainstem, now we have 80% of this very purposeful, powerful, intelligent, even positively emotional part of who we are that we can now draw upon to make decisions and again, bring meaning to our life.
So, I'm sorry, was there...
Yeah, so the first thing I do is I teach people, I give them a model that actually spells brain, about how to shift from the brainstem to the neocortex, because we're going to start in the brainstem. Nobody's going to be able to catch this right away. We're going to find ourselves feeling stressed, angry, frustrated. If we go, aha, I'm in the brainstem, and we do the brain model, and real simply, it's just breathe. So there's that mindfulness component. Use the word relax on the exhale, so you deal with muscle tension. And then we want to ask some neocortex questions. So the breathe is B, the relax is R, the A is ask neocortex questions. The problem is when we're down in the brainstem, we're asking brainstem questions like, what is wrong with these people? And why won't people listen to me? And why do I get behind the slowest person on the road? All that stuff, very understandable, but those are brainstem questions. They will keep us trapped in the brainstem. So I give people 4 neocortex questions they can ask themselves. Number 1, have I chosen this on purpose? Have I decided to be stressed, angry, frustrated? Most people say no. How's it working for me? Is this helping me get the life I want? Most people say no. Now, the third one is fascinating. Is this defining me the way I want to be defined? See, we got to recognize that when we're trapped in that brainstem, what we're doing is we're allowing difficult people in difficult situations to define us. Because when we say life stresses me out, or my kids drive me crazy, or traffic makes me angry, we're really giving traffic and difficult people in difficult situations the power to define us. We don't want to give them that power. So we got to take on that power ourselves. So there's these 4 questions. Am I doing it on purpose? Is it working for me? Is it defining who I am? And I love the 4th one. Would I teach or recommend this way of being to someone I love, my child, my children? And I have yet to meet anyone that would teach someone they love on purpose to be stressed and angry and frustrated. So we use these questions to recognize that, no, I don't want it. I'm not doing this on purpose. It's not working for me. It's not how I want to be defined. And of course, no, I would never teach this to someone I love. So then I have them flip it. Okay, what if we were dealing with this situation, traffic, difficult people, whatever, on purpose, in a way that's more effective, in a way that does define us, and in a way we would teach to someone we love? What would that look like? And I have people come up with a list of qualities or characteristics that fit those 4 criteria, like confident and loving and curious and authentic and flexible and rational and open-minded, all the things that we would teach to those we love. I then have people imagine being that way, because you got to be able to imagine being that way in order to pull it off. So again, the model spells brain. It's breathe, relax, ask those neocortex questions, I for imagine being that way, and then N, notice the change. Because at that point in the model, you will be feeling more calm, more confident, more in control, because you've actually shifted to the upper 80% of the brain.
That's absolutely fantastic from that modeling standpoint, to be able to walk through that, the clarity that is provided there through the questions, so that you're tapping that upper mind is wonderful. Thank you for providing such a clear breakdown, clear model of all of those things. I was also curious if you could go a little further into that idea of imagine being that way, because one of the things that's come up before, and I guess maybe tying this in, is that when people use things like visualization or envisioning where it is that they want to be, the more that they not only see it, but they can actually connect to the experience of what it would be, it seems to anchor them in a completely different way. And so I'd love to hear you, because of your background, to understand that at a deeper level of why that is.
Yeah, here's what we need to know. Any image we hold in our mind triggers a corresponding chemical change in our body, whether it's happening or not. in my book and in my seminars, I actually walk people through an exercise where I say, okay, imagine you have this lemon in your hand and you see the bumpy yellow rind of the lemon. Now we slice the lemon in half and there's lemon juice running down your hand. You can see the shiny yellow pulp of the inside of the lemon. If you squeeze the lemon, juice squirts up. Now, everybody took a big bite of your lemon. And of course, everybody just going, oh my God, the muscle flavor. So what's important to notice is we know we're not biting into a real lemon, but our body is responding chemically to that. So when you can use your imagination, and just like I walk through the lemon, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What's the temperature of the room? What are the sounds you hear? What are the aromas you smell? The more you use your five senses to imagine being confident and compassionate and authentic and understanding. So you're blending kind of a yin and yang. You're not just being all nice, but you're not just being all powerful. It's kind of that combination of powerful and soft and nice combined, like confident and understanding. Who am I when I'm that way? What's my tone of voice? If someone were going to pay me, said that I'll pay you $10 million to practice being confident and compassionate for the next 3 weeks, would you take them up on it? And everybody always says, yes, I would. And I said, do you think you could pull it off? And they say, yes, I could. So you see, we got to make it important. That's the key. We got to make it what I call our highest purpose. We got to make it the most important thing we do. Now, in the book, I go into a whole nother model. Once I get you to the top of the mind with the brain model, I go into another model about how to stay there. And it spells power. So it's really combining brain and power to actually get to the top of the mind and then learn how to live there.
Excellent. So I actually wanted, that's interesting because I do want to go into a little bit of that power because the C3 approach of clarity, confidence, and creativity is part of how we sustain it. Just before we go there, the other thing that I wanted to just reiterate to everybody is that idea of noticing the change, because this is so important that you're anchoring a new frame of reference for yourself. So the more that you start to call out these new experiences of how they're different and take notice, now you're giving your brain more information aside from the retraining. So you've got new experiences to refer back to as the next stressor or the next challenge, the next trigger may come up. So I didn't want to gloss over that one as too quickly either. With that, how do we sustain it? Exactly where you were starting to go. So in the book, you talk about this, the C3 model. You just brought up the power model as well of where that fits in. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate, because most of us love the idea of this, but it's where you're going of how do we actually sustain this in the busyness and chaos, the uncertainty that our life can throw at us from a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. So once we're in the top of the mind and we've got a sense of what it's like to feel confident and creative and compassionate, and once we get a sense of what that feels like, now the question is, how can I bring this to life? One of the things that I always encourage people to do is, again, make it your highest purpose. Make it the most important thing you do. And recognize that if you will practice this for, say, 2 to 4 months, you're actually rewiring your brain. You are creating new neural pathways that go from this scanner, processor, router, limbic system, the middle brain, up into the neocortex. And if you practice that by just imagining it over and over and over 2 or 3 times a day, you actually are creating and sustaining these new neural pathways. They start to become a new habit. So if you'll practice this, if you'll wake up in the morning and ask yourself the question, what is my highest purpose this morning, just this morning? I know some of the people I'm going to be dealing with, some of the situations I'm going to be in. Who do I want to be? How do I want to define myself? And you go into the morning practicing that. Then around lunchtime, you reboot. Reboot is with breathing or the brain model or say a prayer or take some deep breaths or take a walk. But you take a moment to just get a moment of clarity and ask yourself the question, what is my highest purpose this afternoon? Just this afternoon. I know some of the people I'm going to be dealing with, some of the situations I'm going to be in. You go into the afternoon practicing that. Then on the drive home or somewhere around dinner time, you reboot again and ask yourself that third question. What's my highest purpose this evening? Who do I want to be with the most important people in my life, the people that I love the most and who love me the most? And you go into the evening practicing those. That starting in the morning in the top of the mind means, again, remember, you're triggering serotonin and endorphins, so you don't get as exhausted. Around lunchtime, you reboot, and now you're focused just on the afternoon. Then around the drive home or dinner time, you're rebooting your focus just on the evening. Dividing the day into thirds helps us stay focused because you're only staying focused for 2 or 3, 4 hours at a time. You're rebooting, you're using life's transitions, and it helps us rewire the brain to the point where after a while, this is just who you are. This is how you're living. You're just now created this new way of living that's become your new habit, and it just takes over.
I'd be curious for you to also elaborate then on this piece, because I think it's really interesting now, again, we're talking about some of the rewiring, retraining. So when you're focusing things, you're refocusing it in those 2 to 4 hour increments. We're triggering off, like you said, some of the right chemical formula for us with serotonin and things like that. So there's a reason to stay that focused. And at the same time, I think it's really interesting you break it down that way, because when people start questioning, what is that big purpose, when they're looking at the big view, the big vision, it can be really daunting, and it can seem like how am I supposed to figure out this one thing that's going to define everything for me, right? And so I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about how we look at the everyday as well as even every moment purpose, and how do we put that in perspective of this bigger thing that we're chasing?
Yes. So what I like to do is say, okay, I want a purpose. I want a highest purpose that allows me to enjoy life the most, to bring my best to life, to bring the most meaning to life. So to me, when I say highest purpose, here's what that means. It's defining who I am in a way I would recommend to someone I love. Mm. So when I'm doing that, when I'm choosing qualities or characteristics that if my kids were standing there going, hey, Dad, teach me how to deal with traffic. Teach me how to deal with difficult people. Teach me how to deal with unexpected things. And I'm defining myself in those challenging moments in a way I would teach to those I love. Then I can begin to look at this question of, okay, and now what do I want to do with this? Now that I've accomplished this ability to be this way, what difference do I want to make in life? How do I want to bring this either to my job or my church or my kids or my family or my community? I mean, now we begin to see what do we want to do with it. But it's got to start with us bringing that to life so that we're not allowing life to define us. We are defining ourselves in a way we would teach to those we love.
Excellent. So again, just to reiterate, unpack a little bit here of it's a way of being. And I am so glad that you connect it from that standpoint. Obviously, something that comes up a lot in the meaningful way is more about being than achieving or specific things. But it always helps us all recenter. While we have these things we may want to accomplish, things we want to contribute with the world, it begins with the quality of the way of being. How do we want to show up? And I love the reference, the context of way of being as I would teach it or recommend it to someone I love. Wonderful way of framing that. Wonderful way of framing that.
Even kids, I mean, I'm starting to do this with high school kids and college kids. Yeah. And of course, they don't have kids, but boy, they love this question. Would I teach this or recommend this to someone I love? I've yet to meet anyone that doesn't go, wow, okay, that does it. Mm-hmm. There you go. That really gives that clarity, I think. Because when we're thinking about someone we love, we're coming from this loving, wise, nurturing part of who we are, which is the top of the mind. So it automatically puts us in the part of who we are that allows us to access our best and then bring that to life.
And I think it's this beautiful juxtaposition of at times when we start to look to others and specifically to the ones we care about, it's a bit easier for us to look at what would be that way. How do we look at that kindly? How do we look at that compassionately? How do we draw outside of ourselves in a way that benefits others? Because the flip side of it is obviously we do need to do some self-inquiry, but we can get lost in the self-inquiry, and this has a nice juxtaposition of both brought into that question.
Yeah, and what I find is often people are pretty good at being very clear about what they would recommend for their best friend, their child. We just have not been given permission to give that to ourselves. So, it's okay to love others, but if you start to love yourself, people go, well, wait a minute, that's a little conceited. You know what's going on. So this whole idea of, of treating ourselves like we would treat someone we love. It again gives us that opportunity to then nurture who we are in a way that we already know how to nurture others. It's just that applying it to ourselves.
So, Bill, before we do start to wrap things up, I'd love to just hear one more practice that either you recommend or has been really critical for you as well to be able to sustain that top of your mind living.
Yeah, I think the more we're willing to look at this process as almost like getting a degree in life, when most of us went through college or any kind of training, we studied and we went to class and we read books and we did homework and man, we focused on learning that, and as a result, we learned it. If we would be willing to look at life in the same way, where we take that kind of focus and that kind of intensity, the reason I wrote Life from the Top of the Mind is I wanted it to be a manual for how to do this. It takes you step 1 and step 2, step 3. It shows you the brain model. Then it gets into a little bit more philosophical with that power model that's actually purpose, our past, the wisdom of serenity, the energy and responsibility. But it shows you how to use all those to stay there. And then I actually show you in the book how to actually engage other people who are stuck in their resistant brain. How do you get them to shift from their resistant brain to their receptive brain so they actually hear and understand what you're wanting them to know? So
I say I might need to have you back on just to do an entire show just on that piece. But before we do, one of the things I really like circling back around with our guests on is to hear directly from you that at this point in your journey, what is most meaningful in your life and in your work?
Yeah. For me, what I love to do is watch people's lights go on. I love to go and do presentations. That's why I've done over 3,500 of them. I love to do counseling. I love to do coaching and explain this to people because people go, oh my God, nobody's ever explained this way. I wish someone had told me this 20 years ago, And they get so excited about it, and then they start to put it into practice. And, man, there is immediate results. They start feeling better and making better decisions, and their relationships improve. And so really helping people with this material is what gives me so much meaning. And again, it's getting paid to do what I would pay to do. It's pretty cool.
That's fantastic. Bill, I want to thank you for coming on The Meaningful Way and sharing your expertise and just so many wonderful takeaways that everybody can really immediately begin to apply. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. One of the things I like to do when I do these is give people real concrete things they can do immediately, because I know people are looking for this kind of stuff. So
Absolutely.
Thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it out of the park on that for sure. And so for everyone, there's just a lot here that you can go back and even review to be able to take it all in. But I think perhaps the couple nuggets to leave you with, number one is that practice of reflecting on what is my highest purpose for this morning, for this afternoon, for this evening, to look at it in segments, to look at it in just those little phases and give yourself even that connection to purpose and that boost over and over and over again. And as you do, you get to choose a way of being that you would teach or recommend to those that you love. That's a wonderful one to be able to reflect on. And so until we are on again, as always, continue to enjoy the journey. Thanks for tuning in to The Meaningful Way. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor and please subscribe and follow along with all these great guests, their stories and interviews. Also, it helps us a lot if you not only share some of your favorite episodes online, but also provide us feedback. Go into iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your favorite podcast app happens to be, and rate the show. Provide us some feedback and let us know how it is that we're doing. If you want to learn more about what we're up to, whether it be with the IPEC Coach Training School, the Live, Lead, Play Network, or even just what's evolving with The Meaningful Way, go on and head on over to lukeiorio.com.